Hello, welcome to this first part of our module. And we have for you, intertextuality. What might that be, you might ask? Well, let's dive in and find out. So, it's the first part of our module, and we start here with intertextuality notes. So please be so kind as to click here and download the document, as this is going to be our primary outline and notes for what we will be doing throughout this lesson. All right, so let me minimize this. All right, so that is our word of the day, intertextuality. How many of you have heard of this? I wish I could see. But let's break down the word. So the prefix inter means between, okay? Just like the prefix intra means across, but inter means between, okay? So text, we learned from our lesson last week of textual analysis that it's a constructed artifact that carries meaning. So when we put it together, simply put, intertextuality is the relationship formed between texts. Now, how this relates to what we do as essay writers, it's essentially the fact that we make our essays out to be this patchwork, this quilt of other texts. So as academic writers, we incorporate sources into our essay to create this larger conversation that we join and we navigate and guide, okay? So let me give you an example of what this might be, of intertextuality at work. So let's say in my 101 class, we are reading Lady Macbeth. For those of you who read Lady Macbeth, then I'll give you a reminder, and those who haven't read it, I'll tell you a little bit about what happened. So the main character, Macbeth, has a wife named Lady Macbeth. How original, huh? Okay, there's a king called King Duncan. So Macbeth's wife, Lady Macbeth, gets it into her head that her husband Macbeth needs to usurp the throne, commit regicide, and which is killing the king and just taking that throne for himself and becoming king. So she gets it into her head, and through her machinations, she convinces Macbeth to kill King Duncan, which he does. And what's really interesting is that at the start of all this, Macbeth is really hesitant. He is fighting against the idea. He doesn't really want to do it, but then it's the wife, Lady Macbeth, who pushes him to do it, and he ends up doing it. So then, later on down the line, she starts to lose it. She starts to go loony, and there's a famous scene where she's scrubbing her hands. You know, she feels the blood of King Duncan on her hands, and she's scrubbing. How appropriate, huh? During this pandemic, scrubbing her hands, washing her hands, and she's like, so she could still see the blood of King Duncan. So okay, let's say if as a student, I was given an essay, I had to come up with some thesis that pertain to this play, Macbeth. And I was really interested in Lady Macbeth. And remember, with English composition, we want to narrow our focus as much as possible. So if I was interested in Lady Macbeth and I wanted to kind of do like a bit of a character study, particularly within the parameters of her losing her mind and why she loses her mind, and as a student, my claim would be, okay, well, it's because of her guilt, because of her immense guilt. That's why she loses her mind, her immense guilt over plotting and finally achieving the outcome of having her husband kill King Duncan. So the culpability is hers. So if this was my thesis, let's say in William Shakespeare's play Macbeth, okay, obviously introduce the play. Lady Macbeth's prevailing sense of guilt for having a hand in King Duncan's murder acts as a catalyst that ultimately leads her into a state of full-blown madness. Okay, so just like we learned with the thesis worksheet, the anatomy of a thesis has the ID, which is the topic, the claim, which is us saying something about the topic, and then direction, supporting reason. So as you can see, let's identify these parts here. So here's our topic. We introduce our source, Macbeth, and our topic being Lady Macbeth's madness, and we're claiming that she goes mad because of her sense of guilt. So us making that explicit connection, that link there, then that's our claim. What we are missing here in this working thesis, see, we're catching this, would be direction, right? Some supporting reasons. So this is where I might offer like some example from like a plot point that would ultimately help to support my claim of why it is that it's her sense of guilt that's leading her into a sense of full-blown madness. So, okay, so let's continue. So, if it was a research paper, let's say. And remember, with intertextuality, we want to bring in other sources to create this larger conversation, to create this larger quilt, this larger patchwork, right? So with that being said, we can bring in things like articles, we can bring in things like books, we can bring in things like documentaries, interviews with some Shakespearean scholar, whatever the case may be, right? So those are called secondary sources. Okay, now let's get back to our hypothetical situation where, as a student, we want to argue that Lady Macbeth goes mad because of her large sense of guilt. Okay, so what sort of things would I throw into the soup? What secondary sources would I bring in? Well, one could be. Because here's the thing, when finding sources, a lot of times as students we think, okay, I have to find a source that 100% deals with everything that I'm talking about. It has to be about Macbeth, and I can only use that. No, here's where creativity comes into play. So, what if you can just look at one of, what happens to our body? So physiologically, what happens when we're plagued with guilt, right? Another one could be like, what happens maybe psychologically when plagued with guilt, okay? So those articles, they have nothing to do with Macbeth. Instead, they have to do with guilt. It's just a study of what guilt does to us. Physiologically, it could be one article. Psychologically, it could be another article. And we're bringing that into the conversation. Why? Well, because if we're trying to prove that she loses it and goes mad, then if I could find some sort of evidence that feeling so guilty can lead you to madness, can lead a person to madness, then that would help to support my point. Because in the play, Lady Macbeth is she's not a reptilian, she's not a lion, no, she's a human. So with that being said, that's why those sources would help. Like, what happens to a person physiologically, what happens to a person psychologically when plagued with guilt, and if we could somehow demonstrate that, you can lose it and go batty and delve into madness, then that would help our point here. Let's say that maybe another source I use, that one does pertain to Lady Macbeth. It's like let's say it's like a character study, and it's looking at her, and I find a chapter about her sense of guilt, right? So that's the thing. When you're using a book, you don't necessarily have to use it all. Like if you choose something that works, a passage, a chapter, it's cool. Everything doesn't have to like 100% match your project, right? So, and by the way, when you do find sources like articles that pertain to literature, it's called literary criticism, okay? So what you want to do is, it's like a soup, where our essay is a soup. We're boiling a soup, and when you throw in sources, there go the carrots, chop, 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 chop. There go the onions, chop, 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 chop. There goes the spinach. Just throw in some spinach. So you're throwing in different ingredients, and that, my friends, is what intertextuality is. Since it's that relationship between text. We're adding all these ingredients, and we are creating this patchwork. We're creating this quilt through our essay. Because that's what we do with academic writing. It's a larger conversation that we are both entering and guiding, okay? Here's some key terms going your way. Key terms, here they come. You ready? So first of all, we have primary source. In this instance of you being a student being asked to work with the play Macbeth, that's your primary source. It's an original source of information about a topic. So it's the main thing that you're using to really develop your paper. In this case, the main thing is the play, right? A secondary source, a document or recording that relates or discusses information presented elsewhere. In this instance, that would be the articles that we find about what happens physiologically when plagued with guilt, and the article about what happens psychologically when plagued with guilt. Also, the article that is a character study on Lady Macbeth and her bout with guilt. Those are secondary sources. See how they're helping to bolster, to support what it is that we're doing from the primary source, right? Okay. So those are our key terms for now. So, okay, you have this research paper. You're like, okay, how am I supposed to find my sources? Like, if Mr. Godoy already said that I don't have to find something that 100% relates to what it is that I'm with my own project, what my project is, like it doesn't have to be about Macbeth. So how do I do it? Well, here are the central questions that you need to be able to answer for yourself. You need to have this, create this alignment. Number one, you need to recognize that every piece of writing is written with a purpose. It's written with an objective. There's a project there's a project that the writer wants to accomplish through their work. There's something that they want to do. Okay, and that applies even like if you're looking at a book. There's a project within the chapter, right? And that relates to the writer's larger project of the book. But the point is, if you can find some project within a piece of writing that aligns with your own project, right? Just like we were talking about here, if my own project was demonstrating that it's guilt that led Lady Macbeth into madness, then I have to find other areas in a source that can help to bolster, to support me there, okay? So there needs to be alignment. And I want to give you a practical example because we're still somewhere floating high in the ether. We haven't touched down yet. Here comes the application. So the next thing that you see in our module this week is this essay that I wrote when I was in grad school, and it was a class on writing center studies. So this assignment was essentially just asking me to find other sources to help develop my own philosophy as a writing tutor. Okay. Number one, remember, you do not put quotation mark on your own title. Why? Well, because we use quotation marks to cite work that is not your own. But if this title is your own, then you don't have to use quotation marks. Okay. So we were talking about intertextuality, right? This is a cool thing. I don't know if you've ever done it in any of your classes, but it's called annotated bibliography. Essentially, you just cite the source and you answer exactly what we're talking about here, which is identifying what the project is, or what the project is of the component or passage that you're looking at within the secondary source, right? And how that aligns with your own project. So those are the main moves. You want to say, okay, here's what I want to take from this source, and here's the aspect of my project that it connects with, and here's how I'm going to connect it. Okay, so returning to my example of developing my my pedagogy as a writing tutor, I do exactly that. Here's the project of the section that I'm looking at, and here's how it aligns with my own project. Okay, so just listen. So this is from an article called Minimalist Tutoring, Making the Student Do All the Work. In this short periodical article, Jeff Brooks illustrates how to be a minimalist writing tutor. When we use quotation marks on a term, that's because it's a key term that was presented to us from the source, okay? So in this short periodical article, Jeff Brooks illustrates how to be a minimalist writing tutor. The piece The piece develops minimalist tutoring as a method that places students in the driver's seat of their papers, so to speak. Oftentimes, tutors take so much control during a tutorial that they relay a message of authority and control, whether consciously or subconsciously. One of the practical pieces of advice that Brooks offers against this is as simple as sit beside the student, not across a desk. The implication of sitting beside the student during a tutoring session is that you're there to help and provide a situation for them to talk about the writing with you. See, even the configuration of sitting beside them, I thought that was like, whoa, I was like, that's pretty rad. Like even the configuration of how you sit has a lot to do with the message that you are relaying. It's like, that blew my mind. Okay, so now what I aim to take for myself. So it's like, here's a project of the source that I'm interested in adding to my soup, and here's how I wish to bring it into my own larger project within my paper. The implication of sitting beside the student during tutoring session is that you're there to help and provide a situation for them to talk about the writing with you. From this text, what I most aim to appropriate for my own tutoring philosophy is a definitive student-centeredness. So you need to be able to answer what you want to appropriate from that source and how you want to create that alignment with your own project. It's never random. It's never arbitrary. There's always a reason why you want to take it, and you're putting these puzzle pieces together. Okay. So here's what I am to take. I want to make the student the primary agent in the writing center session and make the student understand that your paper has value as a piece of writing. It's worth reading and thinking about like any other piece of writing. Oftentimes this is missing in the minds of students. So see how I answered exactly that. I answered, here's the project of what I'm looking at within this source, and here's what I aim to take from it. And here's how it aligns with my own project. See, when you're searching for a source, you need to be able to answer that for yourself. It's never random, like, oh, this looks cool, but you don't even know how or why you are going to even use it in your paper. That's not going to help you. It's just going to trip you up. Okay. So I keep using this word, conversation. That's because what we do with our writing, what we do with our writing here as academic writers is dynamic. It's not static. It's not formulaic. It's not just a template. It's not dead. It's dynamic. It's this conversation that we are entering into, and we're navigating by bringing in other sources. And that, my friends, is what intertextuality is. And it's a neat thing. And even in the world of art, they do it. Hip hop does it, right? They bring in samples. Satire, and they do it because they're bringing in other like historical moments or commenting on what's happening in society. Like it's this larger conversation. But let's let's reel it back in, and let's get back into what we're talking about, which are essays. So this is a really cool metaphor by this literary theorist named Kenneth Burke, and it helps to further illustrate this point of what it is that we do as academic writers with intertextuality. So listen to this. Imagine that you enter a parlor. So a parlor, for those of us who don't have fancy mansions or don't have a parlor is essentially like a living room for socializing, okay? So imagine that you enter a parlor. You come late. When you arrive, others have long preceded you, and they're engaged in a heated discussion. A discussion too heated for them to pause and tell you exactly what it's about. In fact, the discussion had already begun long before any of them got there, so that no one present is qualified to retrace for you all the steps that had gone before. You listen for a while until you decide that you've caught the tenor of the argument. Then you put in your oar. Someone answers, you answer him, another comes to your defense, another aligns himself against you to either the embarrassment or gratification of your opponent, depending on the quality of your ally's assistance. However, the discussion is interminable. The hours grow late, you must depart, and you do depart, with the discussion still vigorously in progress. So this happens in real life, right? Like we come to a party late, we find our friends, they're talking, and you first have to be quiet and listen to see what it is that they're talking about, so you can catch the tenor of conversation before you can put in your or, right? Because like it wouldn't make sense if they're talking about, I don't know, if they're talking about that they're planning a vacation next month, and all of a sudden you're like, yeah, so the Dodgers are awesome, right? It's like, no, you got to listen first to what the tenor of conversation is before you can put in your or. So how does that pertain to here's another example too. So doctors, any doctor worth their salt stays on top of how their field is evolving and all the changes. And how do they do that? Well, they subscribe to medical journals, right? They go to conferences. Let's say I was a doctor and my specialty was prosthetics. Therefore, I would be subscribed to medical journals that pertain to prosthetics, and it informed me of the evolutions and development of what's happening in the world of prosthetics. I would attend conferences and seeing what's happening in the world of prosthetics, and I would even present. So I would contribute as well to what's happening in this world of prosthetics. So thus entering this larger conversation and even contributing to it, and that's exactly what you do with these essays. Okay, it's a conversation. Here's another cool illustration. This can be likened to a lawyer. So lawyers use exhibits and they call witnesses to the stand to engage in conversation with them, right? And they're very intentional. They're using sources and exhibits to prove their point, which is defending their client. And let's say that their client, you, have been accused of tax evasion. Oh no. So you're being accused of that, and then your lawyer wants to prove that you are innocent, and their thesis, their central argument, is that you really did pay your taxes. It was just some mistake, some glitch in the computer, and you want to prove that. Okay, so as a lawyer, that's your main avenue through which you're going to prove. That's your thesis. That's your main avenue through which you're going to prove that your client is innocent, which is you're their client. So then the lawyer is intentional with the witnesses they call to the stand, with exhibits. So when we bring in sources and engage in conversation with them, just like a lawyer does, we intentionally navigate the conversation by bringing this in so as to bring out our own, flesh out our own thesis, our own argument. So that's what we do. And here's the thing. A lawyer does not just say, okay, I call this witness to the stand, and gives them the microphone and just says nothing. The witness talks. Okay, come here, bring in the next witness. The witness talks, then the next one, then the next one, and then, all right, that's it. Case dismissed. I got nothing to say. That's what is the equivalent of in writing when you just are saying, okay, this source says that, this source is this source says the third. Like, that's handing the mic to the sources. Like, no. You as a lawyer, you're navigating it. You're bringing it. You're pulling in quotes to help you, right? With your thesis, with your central argument. Okay, so don't just hand the mic to the sources and leave it there. Okay, so now we change gears a little bit, and we go into citation practices. So, we have to give credit where credit is due. I was talking about Macbeth. I did not write Macbeth, so I have to credit it, okay? So, we do that by citing our sources. So they're called in-text citations within our paper, and that's what we're talking about here, and having a works cited page at the end of our essays. So, this is important. Have you ever been like, okay, I know this is a movie, but I'm not sure if I underline it or if I use quotation marks. To underline or use quotation marks? That is the question. So, quotation marks are for components. What's a component? A component is just a part of something larger. right? A cooler to and I'll tell you a bit in a moment, but when you underline or italicize interchangeable, it's a container. Okay, so now back to what I was going to say. A cool way to remember this is, I like to think of this line, I pretend it's like a big glass line, right? If I were to break it, then the shards are components. These look like components of a larger line. That's a good way to remember it. And then the line is like, it's the holistic larger container. And then interchangeably, you can italicize. Well, what does that mean for the world of sources? Good question. So, okay, a component. Let's think. A song, okay? Songs are held in containers, right? What's the container? The album, right? So a song title is a component, right? Because it's held within the container of the album, okay? A movie. What about a movie? Is a movie a component or a container? No, a movie's a container. It's a standalone. It does have scenes though. The name of a scene, maybe like the scene is called The Last Goodbye. The name of that scene would be a component because it's part of it. And just like I said, for containers, you can underline or italicize. What about articles? You'd be like, okay, yeah, I'm not sure, Mr. Godoy. Well, the thing about articles is that they are housed within larger publications. So, articles are housed within journals, right? Or magazines, or newspapers, or websites. So, they are considered components. So you put articles in quotation marks. Oh, what about the journal? Is a journal a component or a container? Well, the journal is the container, right? It's the holistic, larger source that holds other smaller things, right? Or sources. A journal holds articles, right? What about magazines? Same thing. The magazine title is the container in this case, right? And it holds articles as well. So, okay. With that being said, now that we've talked a little bit about when to use quotation marks and when to underline, hopefully you can remember, and this homework and this section is going to help with that. For in-text citations, we want to introduce the source's author, make it clear who they are and why they're an authority figure on your topic, right? So listen to this. Let's return to our example of our Macbeth paper that we're writing. We're wanting to prove that it's because of Lady Macbeth's guilt that she descends into madness. Okay, so listen to this. Sorry, it's a little bit loud. This mic is that good. I think I gotta lower the gain a little bit. Okay, so let's return to this. In her article entitled Lady Macbeth's Descent into Madness, okay, we know it's an article, it's in quotation marks. Now I say who this person is. The Shakespeare scholar, Maria Garcia. So I say why this person's an authority figure on even commenting on your topic, right? In this case, we're writing about Macbeth, so she's a Shakespeare scholar, so of course she's an authority figure, okay? Okay, so in her article entitled Lady Macbeth's Descent into Madness, that's the article title, say who this person is. The Shakespeare scholar, Maria Garcia. Notice I didn't call her Maria. She's not my friend. She's not my homie. Call them by their first name before you can start to call them by their last name. So the Shakespeare scholar Maria Garcia explores the connection between Lady Macbeth's guilt over King Duncan's death and her own eventual loss of sanity. Okay, remember I'm creating this larger conversation. Here's a direct quote. Where upon reaching a tipping point of guilt, Lady Macbeth went mad. Let's pretend that was the quote. You put her last name in parentheses, the page number, and then with the period at the end. The ultimate consequence of madness is directly linked to extreme guilt. To better understand this, we simply need to look further into human psychology. Okay, so here, let's say I bring in the other source. But the main thing I want you to see is that, notice that I said what the source is. Okay, it's an article. It could have just as well been a book. If it's a book, say it's a book. If it's a movie, say it's a movie. If it's a documentary, say it's a documentary. If it's an interview, say it's an interview. So say what the source is, what the source title is, and then who the author is and what's their name, okay? And then for direct quotes, use quotation marks. If you're taking anything verbatim, if you're paraphrasing, you don't have to use quotation marks, but, say who the source is, obviously, okay? And we're going to have opportunities to practice this. So check this out. What do these mean? Okay, so Garcia 10, what does that mean? That means that what we are covering or referencing is found on page 10. What about Garcia 10-12? Then what we are covering, what we're looking at, are found on page 10, 11, and 12. What about this? Garcia 10, 13, 15. So this means that what we're looking at are found on page 10, 13, and 15. Okay? So pay attention, because I'm going to give you the answer to 3 questions from your homework that are going to confuse you unless you pay attention. So the rationale behind in-text citations, between how to properly tag them, is that we want to avoid redundancy. What does it mean to be redundant? To be redundant means to repeat the same thing. So look at this. It took another century for things to be set right. That's a quote. Lopez 5. Okay. That's good. Listen to this. According to Miguel Gutierrez, the majority of the factory had been left in shambles. Why is this not in quotation marks? Well, it means that we're paraphrasing something that he said. We're using our own words to paraphrase something that they said, okay? But we're crediting the author, obviously, right? So here we would not put Gutierrez too, because we already said it in the same sentence. We already said Gutierrez in the same sentence. So to avoid redundancy, that's the rationale. We just have 2. So you don't say Gutierrez. No. Okay? Listen to this last example. Remember, I'm giving you the answer to 3 questions from the homework. I don't want to see you getting this wrong. In an interview with Susan Smith, she divulged the reasoning behind her defection to Russia. Okay, so here, we don't have Smith, because we already said Susan Smith, right? And when we said an interview, you can, for the in-text citation, you don't have to say necessarily like what minute it's found in. You could say that in your works cited page. But see, we avoided redundancy. We didn't say Smith, Gutierrez here, because here in the same sentence we don't say the author's last name. So if in the same sentence we say the author's last name, there's no need to tag it with the same last name again at the end. Okay, so writing is a conversation. Academic writing is a conversation. Just like in real conversations, we create a sandwich of sorts. If we're talking about something else, like let's say we're talking about a movie we saw, fine. That's our source there. We're talking about it. We say stuff about it. We follow it up. We don't just say, hey, in the movie, remember that part where blah, 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 blah? And we don't just leave it there. No, it's like a sandwich. We follow it up. We say more about it, right? We follow it up. To check this example out, let's return to my paper that I just want to show you a little bit about intertextuality at work, where I'm patching together different sources. Rather than being overly concerned with fixing students' papers, the praxis behind my operating as a writing tutor instead places a heavy focus on the student itself. Stephen M. North, in his article, The Idea of a Writing Center, I say who the writer is, I say what the type of the source is, it's an article, I say the title, The Idea of a Writing Center, clearly establishes the objective of the writing tutor. Okay, here's a direct quote. Our job, I put this in parentheses because when the subject is not clear, you can clarify that by having a parentheses. Our job, we're talking about the writing center, is to produce better writers, not better writing. The person's last name, North, 438. This reasoning makes perfect sense to me, that resonates deeply with my own conception of what a service job like a writing tutor is supposed to be focused on. Okay, see how I follow it up? I'm talking about what I just said, like remember the movie example? I didn't just say, hey, remember in that movie we saw last night? Remember this part? I don't just leave it there. No, I say something about that part, right? I don't just leave it there. So the other thing too, like after you call them Stephen M. North, then you would just call them North, okay? Like you don't call them Stephen because they're not your friend. You don't know them. Okay, you don't personally know them. So based on just talking about some of these ideas from Stephen M. North's article, let's see. Let me start here. Let me just read this all. Rather than being overly concerned, I'm gonna read this fast, so try to keep up. Rather than being overly concerned with fixing students' papers, the practice behind my operating as a writing tutor instead places a heavy focus on the student itself. Stephen M. North, in his article, The Idea of a Writing Center, clearly establishes the objective of a writing tutor. Our job in the Writing Center is to produce better writers, not better writing, North 438. This reasoning makes perfect sense to me and resonates deeply with my own conception of what a service job like a writing tutor is supposed to be focused on. The student is at the center of this job, not just fixing their paper. Working with written drafts is just a characteristic of our jobs. In the same way, my highest concerns rest on students' growth and development. As a writing tutor, I cannot go inside of students' head and make them grow and develop. In fact, this form of reasoning would be a fallacy because each brand of growth and development is different from person to person. I view my task as making sure to create the situations and conditions for my tutees to attain high realizations within themselves and clear understanding of what writing is and how to do it. Many students feel overwhelmed and confused by writing because they have a convoluted and unclear conception of it. The way that I would move to clarify students' understanding of writing is predicated upon my subscription to the idea of writing as a process and to the social approach of composition and writing. That is just, okay, so you see how I'm starting to come into the next source, because the next source is, I talked about the social approach, right? So I'm starting to come in slowly. I'm bridging in from topic to topic, because if you remember from our grammar lesson, we don't just jump from topic to topic. Instead, we create a bridge from topic to topic. And how do we do that? Is by finding a point of commonality to assert explicitly and segue into the next topic. You don't just fly from what is it? What's the city north of San Francisco that you got to cross the Bay Bridge? I don't remember. You know what? Let's look it up together. Let's see. Golden Gate Bridge. Let's look on the map. I completely forgot. There we go. What is this? Sausalito. Okay. So you don't just fly from San Francisco to Sausalito. No, you cross the Golden Gate Bridge. So with that being said, we don't just fly from topic to topic. No, we cross a bridge. We create a bridge. We find a point of commonality and segue into it. Okay, so let's return here. The way that I would move to clarify students' understanding of writing is predicated upon my subscription to the idea of writing as a process and the social approach to composition and writing. Okay, I'm getting into this, the bridge. This is to say that I would operate under a framework of talking out the ideas of a tutee's mind and paper. Why did I put this in quotation marks? Well, because the next article uses this phrase, right? So here, remember I talked about social approach? My reference to the social approach is keenly elucidated in Kenneth A. Brefait's article, Peer Tutoring and the Conversation of Mankind. Brefait develops his approach based upon the assertion that as civilized human beings, notice here we have an ellipses. When we have an ellipses is that we are omitting material. So it means there's more in the quote, but we're just recognizing that but not using it in our citation, okay? As civilized human beings, we're the inheritors of a conversation. Okay, fine. So notice how I was talking about here of my conception of the work of a writing tutor, and then I got into being able to talk out the ideas of a tutee's mind, and which is the social approach, which segues into what they're talking about in this article. Okay, you don't have to care about this topic. I just want you to see how when you're using sources, you're creating a bridge, you're creating a transition, a point of commonality to go from topic to topic as you're crafting this larger conversation, just like a lawyer does, okay? Call the author by their last names. I already said that. Now, last thing we're going to do is learn to create a works cited page. Awesome. And that's part of our homework too. So that link is actually included in our module as well. MLA practice worksheet. Okay, so that's our homework. And here's the link. Let's go to the link. Owl at Purdue link. So the kind people at Purdue University, which is in Indiana, by the way, have created this awesome resource for us. Just let me, I don't want to see the ad. I don't like ads. Okay. A works cited, first of all, goes at the end of a paper. Works cited, examples. It goes at the end of a paper. It has what's called a hanging indent, which we learned okay, so see, it's in alphabetical order, D, H, M, and it has a hanging indent, okay? So remember that. It's in alphabetical order, and it has a hanging indent. What's a hanging indent? I believe we talked about this in the last video. Actually don't recall, but just in case, how to do a hanging indent. So the hanging indent, remember, is that with our works cited page, is that every line after the first is indented in. So the easiest way, honestly, is to place your cursor at the end of the first line, then hit tab. Okay. So it's in alphabetical order. It has a hanging indent. Let's get into how to do it. So what we see here, let me minimize this here just so that we can have a cleaner space. I'm really into having a cleaner space. It makes things way easier. Okay, so when we have a source, we are given details about the source. We're not always given all the details of a source, just the details that we know. So you're not responsible for the details that you're not given, only those that you are. So this is the order of details that we follow when we create a works cited page. I want you to notice this too. These punctuation marks, they're not random. Nope, there's a reason. Notice how the period, everything else, commas, and period. Okay, you just have to remember this. The period is after the author and after the source title, and then at the end of everything, right? Just remember that. Author, the actual title of your source, and then at the end, kind of like we end a sentence. So let's look at some of these examples. Excuse me. Okay. And we learned about when to underline and italicize, when to use quotation marks. Okay, author. Okay, so when we have an author's last name, we start by their last name and then comma first name. So Baba, Baba, comma, Homie, right? Homie, K. So that's how we do the author. So last name, comma, first name. If they have a middle initial, fine. Remember what I said about the period? The period goes after the author and after the title source. Everything else, there's commas. You notice? Commas, commas, commas. The period's the last one. Okay. And we have our title of our source. Notice that it's italicized. Therefore, it's a... Do you remember? It's not in this one. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and close this one. I'm having trouble dragging this here. Why is that? Okay. Okay, we were talking about that way when we started, right? Here we go. So when you underline or italicize, that's a container. So therefore, we're saying that the hummingbird house is a container. Therefore, it's potentially a book, right? It can't be an article because an article is a component. Okay, so Henley, comma, Patricia, period, because that's the author. The hummingbird house, that's the source title. Okay, this one is the publisher. What does it mean to publish? To publish just means to make something public. So, film company, production companies, they publish films, right? In books, publishing houses publish books, right? we make it public. We can disseminate it now. It's available for the public. So in this case, here's the publisher, McMurray, right? So notice how we have in this example, we have author, we have title of source, and we have publisher, and then we have the publishing date, right? Publication date. We don't have all this other stuff because, if in this instance we're not given those details, then you're not responsible for that. Okay. How about this one? Lundman Commons Susan, How to Make Vegetarian Chili. Cool. That's the article title. Remember, articles are found within larger publications. In this case, or larger containers. In this case, since this is an electronic source, this is found in this website, eHow. Of course, it's italicized because that's the container. So, author Lundman Susan, title, source title, How to Make Vegetarian Chili. Notice the periods, period after the author, period after the title source. This is the article. eHow is the container. It's housed in this website. What is this? This is called a location. A location could be, it's just where you found it. It can be a website, or if you're only using pages 29 to 31, let's say, then those pages are the location, right? Oh, check this out. So here, volume number and issue number. So that's what we mean when we say number. So before the days of using Google to find our answers, people use encyclopedias, right? Encyclopedias had volume numbers and they have issue numbers, right? Same thing with journals. Here's a journal, is a volume number and issue number. So the order is always macro to micro. So when we are looking at an episode of a Netflix series, it's always season, that's the macro, episode, that's the micro, right? So similarly with journals and things like encyclopedias, volume, that's the macro, issue number, that's the micro, housed within the volume, right? So let's take a look at this. Bagchi Alaknanda, that's the author, period. Here's the source title, and because it's in quotation marks, we're like, okay, it's in quotation marks, therefore it's a, say it, components. And in this case, potentially an article. So conflicting nationalisms, look, it has a subtitle. The Voice of the Subaltern in Mahasweta Devis by Cited. Wow, that's a mouthful. So here is the journal name, Tulsa Studies in Women's Literature. And remember that the periods are after the author and after the source title. Everything else are commas, right? So here we have our author, Bagchi Alaknanda, and here we have our source title, Conflicting Nationalism, The Voice of the Subaltern in Mahasweta Devis by Cited. That's a mouthful. Here we have our container. See, title of container. In this case, that's the name of this journal, Tulsa Studies in Women's Literature. Then we have remember we were talking about the number. So volume number, volume 15, because journals have volume numbers and issue numbers. Then the date of publication. Date it was made public. Then the page numbers, which are the location, right? In this case, we're using pages 41 to 50. Notice how it ends with a period, okay? Ooh, we have a song here. Oftentimes we think, okay, authors are only writers. No, not so. Authors are simply the creators of sources, right? So a source can be a song. Absolutely. Who is our author here? Beyonce. Period. Pray You Catch Me. Remember what I said about songs? Songs being components. Why? Because songs are housed by albums, right? Albums are the containers. Yeah? Album titles, those are underlined. Yeah? You can underline or italicize. Remember, it's an interchangeable choice. But quotation marks, it's a song. Okay, so author, Beyonce, period. Pray You Catch Me, source title, in quotation marks, period. Here is the container. It's the album, right? Lemonade. Okay? Remember, there's only periods after the author and the source title. Here's the container, this album. This is the publisher, Parkwood Entertainment, right? The date of publication, 2016. And what happened to that? Did I lose it? And this has a link in this case, so it has a location. Remember, we're only working with the details that we know, which is what we're going to be doing for homework. I think you guys are getting this. Other contributors. Okay. What does it mean to be an other contributor? What constitutes that? Okay. Someone who helps editing. Let's say you write a book, a children's book, and your friend helps you by illustrating. So your friend is considered other contributor because they are illustrator, right? Let's say your friend from Russia writes a story in Russian, and you happen to be fluent in both Russian and English, and you translate it from Russian into English, and then they publish it. So you are considered translator, right? That's considered other contributor. Please pay attention to this. Other contributor does not go in the front, because in the front only goes the author. Okay? So you would not put Foucault, Michel, Richard Howard. No, because then you would be saying that Richard Howard was also the author. No. He's just an other contributor, okay? And that goes, as you can see here, after the source, in this case, after the source and the other contributor, right? Keep losing it. We already did the Beyonce one. Oh, here we go. Okay, so author, Foucault, Michel, period. Periods after author, right? Madness and Civilization, lovely. History of Insanity and the Age of Reason. Oh, that sounds lovely. Okay, it's a container, so potentially it's a book, period, right? So this is interesting because it's both the it's both the source title and just happens to be a container, right? So the source title happens to be a container because it's a book, yeah? So notice that. Our source happens to be a container in this case. Therefore, since it's a container, it's italicized or underlined, remember? This is other contributors. So with other contributor, you do not put Howard Richard, you put their name in order. Richard Howard, okay? So author Foucault Michel, period. Here is the source title, Madness and Civilization, A History of Insanity and the Age of Reason. It's a book, okay? Period, okay, because that's the source title. Here's other contributor, translated by Richard Howard, comma. Vintage Random House, that's the name of the publisher, comma. This is the date of publication. Okay? Version, okay. If we're given a version, so I don't want you to mix up number and version. A number, we already said, it's like, it can be something like volume and issue number or season and episode, always going from macro to micro. But a version, you guys as students know this. When you get a textbook, your teacher's like, okay, no, you have to get the latest edition, right? You can't get, teacher, can I get the old edition? No, you have to get the latest edition. That's what we mean by, did I skip it? I'm having trouble finding it here. That's what we mean by version. It could be an edition or even the Bible that has like King James Version, New International Version, things like that. That's what we mean by version. If you're given that info, then that's what we mean by version, okay? We were talking about volume number, publisher. Look at you. Look at this. We're progressing. Location, we talked about it could be a page, it could be a link, if you're given that info. Here's another thing. Sometimes you will be given the names of where it was published, like in what city. Like sometimes you'll be given the info of not only the name of the publisher, but also the city of where it was published. So if that happens, like let's say this example, you would cite it as follow. Okay, author Jameson, comma George P. Period. Ellis Island book. We're told where it was published, the city, so New York, and then it's colon, and then it's the name of the publisher. So the rationale to help you remember this is, okay, where was it published and by who? It's a good way to remember. So where? New York. Colon, by who? By Icon Press. That's the name of the publishing house. When was it published? 2006. Okay, so just have that, make that little mental note. Here's another big one. Accessed. So with electronic sources, we use this word accessed to indicate when we access the source and to differentiate it between when it was published, right? And here's the thing. You cannot access something before it's published, right? Before it's made public, you can't access it. So do pay attention to that. The homework's going to try to trick you. So here we're saying that this person accessed it on May 4th, 2009. So see how there's two dates here? 2002 is when it was published. Accessed serves as the word to mark when it was accessed, obviously, okay? So pay attention to that. The homework's going to try to trick you. So now let's actually take a look at the homework. So this is your main source, this link, and there's also some help here in the homework. So this is the worksheet, this is the homework. So what is the homework? Well, the homework is exactly what we've been practicing. You're going to be given details of your source. Remember, you're only responsible for creating a works cited page for the details that you are given, okay? Not for what you're not given. Okay, a book by Henry Goldman and Elizabeth Howard called Ancient Civilizations. It was published in Philadelphia by Goldhouse in 1989. Just FYI, here's a little bit more details here. One thing we actually have not talked about is a book by two authors. So look how we do it. Last name, comma, first name, and first name, last name. Okay, cool. Let's look at this example. Last name, Smith, comma, Henry G. Okay. And Betty Harmon. Okay, cool. Notice how it wasn't last name, comma. No, it's just for the first one, okay? So, yeah, so those are your main guides. Is this what we have at the end of the homework and the link that you have here. All right, so let's go ahead and do the first one. All right, a book by Henry Goldman and Elizabeth Howard. We have two authors. Let's start with our first author. Authors, remember, do we write Henry Goldman or do we write Goldman Henry? Second one, right? Goldman, comma, Henry, and Elizabeth Howard. Okay, we learned about using periods and commas. Remember that you only use periods after the author and after the source title, right? So here we have our author. We put period. So we're given our authors. We're told it's a book. So we have to think, okay, a book, is that a component or is that a container? Oh, it's a container, right? Because a book holds chapters, right? So it's a container. Therefore, we underline it, right? Please, if you're gonna write it out in pen, please don't use italics. Instead, underline so I can know when you are being intentional about indicating that is indeed a container. Okay, so a book by Henry Goldman and Elizabeth Howard called Ancient Civilizations. Okay, it's a book, therefore we have to underline it. Member, so this is the author, period. Source title, period, right? What else are we told? It was published in Philadelphia by Goldhouse in 1989. Remember we just learned that if we're given the city name, that goes before the name of the publisher. So the rationale is, here's the place where it was published and here's who it was published by, right? Notice that's followed by a colon here. So let's go ahead and do that. And first of all, let's get rid of this. Philadelphia, city of Philadelphia. Philadelphia. colon, Gold House, name of the publisher, period or comma? Comma now, right? Date of publication, 1989, period. We're almost done. What are we missing? We're missing our hanging indent. Remember I said with a hanging indent, every line after the first is tabbed in. How do we do that? Put the cursor at the end of the first line, then hit tab. Boom, we got it. So we got the first one. The rest is up to you. It's going to try to trick you. Don't go off of how it gives it to you here. Like, instead go off of determining whether or not it's a component or a container, okay? Like, some are going to try to trick you. This one, oh, hopefully this one does not trick you, because this is what we covered about the in-text citations. And remember, avoiding redundancy. So revisit that part of our video. All right, this is determining what is wrong and fixing it in terms of order. So listen, my friends, Works Cited can be tough if you really haven't had experience, but that's what we're doing. We're diving in and we're getting our feet wet. So that's the worksheet for this part of this week's homework. And as you can see, that's going to be due November 8th, which is, if I'm not mistaken, actually I have this, what's today? 25th. That's in 2 weeks. Okay, so it's not due next Sunday, but it's due in 2 weeks. So you can start this. A big tip that I have for you, especially since you're doing online classes, is to get yourself a wall calendar. And on your wall calendar, so that's your mission control. On your wall calendar, write your upcoming deadlines so that you can see what's coming up and that you can intentionally put energy towards the closest deadline. Excuse me, there's a loud plane. There we go. Okay, so that's that. And that's what we're doing for this video. Let's see if I don't think there's anything else that I missed. Yep. Okay. Please watch the other videos for the other parts of our module. Hope you enjoyed this one, and get on your homework. Hopefully you learned some things. With that being said, I'll see you guys on in the next video.